Good morning, ninth graders. How are we doing this morning? This is Miss D speaking. We'll be going over the background of the Middle Ages today. It is important because that's when Old and Middle English were spoken. Okay, so the medieval age is broken down to early, middle, and late, just like the English language is broken down into three parts as well. But you can't really speak about the medieval age unless you speak about the fall of Rome that happened 200 years prior. And when I say it happened 200 years prior, I mean it took 200 years for Rome to fall. And what happened was Rome grew so big and so vast it could no longer govern itself. People were too far spread out. They couldn't collect taxes. Tribes started invading. They tried different things, splitting Rome in half so the east half didn't necessarily blend with the west half. The ideas failed to merge, and it just began more and more discord. So, because it became so decentralized, these tribes started coming full force. The Vikings from the north, then Attila the Hun, the Goths that came in, then they began raiding the Visigoths, the Magyars, and they just raided villages, plundered, took over, burned them to the ground, raped the women, the whole 9 yards, took everything. So as they're breaking Rome up, also migrations start coming into the area to settle. You've got the Franks that head towards North Gaul, which later becomes France. You've got the Anglos and the Saxons and the Jutes that go to Britain and Scots and Wales. You got the Vandals that come in towards Africa. They go across the Strait of Gibraltar into Africa. So as all this is transpiring and Rome is trying to fight back, they're trying to get their military together to fight all these people. But they're running out of money because they can't collect the taxes. So they're trying to tax the people more, and the people are revolting all over Europe. And so they can't even pay their military or feed their military, and essentially Rome falls apart. So it's actually the heads of the tribal families that have come in that are running this area now. But they begin to interbreed and marry into the Roman culture. So we're going to have a clash or blend, a mixing of these two very different cultures. Thank you. The first thing that starts in the early Middle Ages is the Roman side of it. The Christians have their clergy members writing the Bible, handwriting the Bibles, transcribing it, sending it out throughout Europe to spread around their theologies. But they can't even get along because the eastern side of the churches and the western side of the churches didn't share the same ideas or the same language. The Eastern churches wrote in Greek, spoke in Greek. The Western churches spoke in Latin. So this caused a division in the church, and they split in 1054. So not too much else is going on. There's a few universities starting to pop up, and scholasticism, which was supposedly a blend of reality, reason, and faith, was being taught. So you can see the reason and the reality coming from the tribal stuff, the faith-based theology coming from the Roman Christian thinking, and that's how they came up with scholasticism. Well, things get a little bit better. Charlemagne comes in, takes over. He's a really strong believer in literacy and the arts and building and architecture, and he really builds the place up. And so we evolve into the High Middle Ages. Now, the first thing that happens in the High Middle Ages is that Europe's population explodes. From 1,000 to 1,347, 35 to 80 million people. It went from 35 million to 80 million people, almost 3 times the amount. Then the religion, you have your regular clergy, you have your secular. The regular clergy were the monks, they hung out in the church. The secular clergy walked out into the world, spread the word of the Bible, and then you had your parish priests, who are your peasants. They handled the everyday problems between people. But again, you still have this blend of Roman Christian kind of thinking and this tribal, godlike kind of thinking. And so the blend of them resulted in mystification, sorcery, witchcraft, and you begin to get white magic, black magic, beliefs in using herbs and leeches and bleeding and all kinds of spells. So it was an evolution. And the good side of that evolution was, like, on the technological front, they had crossbows and developed cannons and gunpowder and horse armor and clocks and windmills and all kinds of things. Politically, groups of people began to band together and they began to draw governmental lines. The countries of France and England, Germany and Spain start to appear. And the Crusades continued. There were several crusades. They continued to try to regain control of the Holy Land that the Muslims now owned. So there was a lot of transition, a lot of growth in population and technology in the High Middle Ages. So it evolves into the late Middle Ages. Well, I'm telling you, the late Middle Ages did not start out so well. Ends on a pretty good note, but it didn't start out so well. Because the first thing that happens is you get the Great Famine. And what happened there? Well, the climate changed. It started to cool. But before it gets really cold, it starts raining. Cold, wet, rainy rain. People are getting sick. Crops are dying. They're saturated with water. They can't grow anything. Then it gets so cold, we now refer to that time period to as the Little Ice Age. That lasted a couple of years. Then it began to warm up again. But what happens when it warms up? It starts raining again. So it rained on and on and on for a couple more years. Crops can't grow, people are dying off, no food to be had, blah, 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 blah. The whole thing lasted about 6-7 years. And then turn around, and not that much later, about 30 years later, roughly, you get hit with the Black Death Plague. And that killed over 35 million people. Well, fewer people means less labor, means you get paid higher, so that's kind of good, and rents are lower. But there's fewer people to produce food. Thank goodness there's a lower food demand. So it's kind of like going into a recession. Everything's recessed. People are not happy. People are rarely happy. The peasants begin to revolt. They revolted in England and Italy and France, everywhere, all across Europe. Jewish communities are expelled. Racism at its finest. Religious factions begin to happen. Henry VIII starts his own Church of England because the Catholic Church won't let him get divorced. I'll just start my own church. So this goes on for a while. And then things have a way of turning around, coming full circle. Michelangelo gets on the scene, starts painting beautiful things, the Sistine Chapel, the Vitruvian Man. He starts analyzing the structure of man, and this kind of brings into the light, it brings into light about how people are starting to study science and medicine And you can see from the drawings, the embryology, the picture of the man with this thing on his head with a hole, you know, that's a type of surgical procedure. They're starting to look inside the body at the bones and the blood and disease and how to conquer these things. Granted, they've just come out of a very bad spell. They start making inventions. Leonardo da Vinci had loads and loads, hundreds of pictures of inventions that he created. That spinning wheel at this time was created. Blast furnace, ivory caskets. The windmill tower was improved. Literature came back upon the scene. Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, Dante's Divine Comedy. Explorers began exploring again. Christopher Columbus sailed across the Atlantic Ocean. Didn't discover America, like we say, but he discovered Central America. Marco Polo went to China, famous for his Silk Roads travel. So all this expansion of ideas and knowledge brought us into the era of the Renaissance, which is not for today's lecture. So, what I want you to do is review my PowerPoint presentation and prepare for a generalized quiz tomorrow. It'll be 10 questions, real simple, but I believe you should be able to differentiate between the early, middle, late, and prior to the Middle Ages. Okay? If you have any questions, please feel free to reach me at Miss D at instructionaldesignclasses@gmail.com. Thank you.